Hayao Miyazaki will go down as one of the most important names in animation's history. While Disney has been able to dominate for most of its existence, Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli were able to help push the market of Japanese anime in the West. Few animes had breached into the Western mainstream, but examples like Dragon Ball and Pokemon were able to spearhead a breach into other cultures. Few had as much success as Miyazaki did. His directorial debut came with the 1970 film The Castle of Cagliostro, and his career from then on would be nothing but a continuous rise to greatness. Although it would take many years to do so, Miyazaki eventually founded Studio Ghibli in 1985. From there, Studio Ghibli began to pump out instant classic after instant classic. The first three films written by Miyazaki were Castle in the Sky, My Neighbor Totoro, and Kiki's Delivery Service. Grave of the Fireflies was also released in 1988, leading to a strong decade before the company had even reached 5 years old. While the 90s were a decade that saw the release of more classics from the studio, such as Princess Mononoke, it was the 2000s that saw a set list of movies that saw not only domestic success, but success in the West. The decade started off strong right away with the release of Spirited Away, often considered one of the greatest animated films of all time. Ghibli would go on to add Howl's Moving Castle and Ponyo to their archives as the decade pressed on. After a rapid-fire release of films in the early 2010s, Studio Ghibli had slowed down quite a bit in recent years. The Wind Rises remains the last film that Ghibli has released at the time of this video. A future movie is planned for release in the next 2 to 3 years, which is already the longest period of time the studio has gone without releasing a feature-length film. Studio Ghibli has had an incredible amount of success, while the company owns 5 of the top 10 highest grossing anime movies of all time. Even with the release of new anime, most notably with the new Demon Slayer movie that jumped into second place, Spirited Away remains in the top spot both in terms of revenue and popularity. But just below those two movies sits another movie that has garnered critical acclaim, as well as praise both domestically and internationally. And it's quite possible that the mind behind this title could be the next great writer. Makoto Shinkai worked primarily on short films early on in his career, with a 5-minute animation She and Her Cat winning several awards in 1998. It wouldn't be until the 2004 release of The Places Promised in Our Early Days where Shinkai brought a fully produced story to life, and while awards and nominations were well deserved for this title, it would be a few more years until Shinkai truly made a name for himself. 2007 saw the release of 5 centimeters per second, and is often hailed as one of the greatest anime movies of all time. Shinkai's writing perfectly captures the buildup of romance and the harsh pain of reality. A film of being unable to accept one's mistakes and shortcomings, the film prides itself on the pain it can bring to the viewer. As most romance films end with satisfaction and a happy conclusion, 5 centimeters per second purposefully avoids this closure. The main character's inability to accept the fate he had drawn for himself years after it was set in stone, leading to the destruction of his relationships in his future. This film earned Shinkai massive amounts of praise, with some officially labeling Shinkai as the second coming of Hayao Miyazaki. A tragic tale of a hopeless, one-sided romance constructed with a small cast against a breathtaking landscape and animation. It was a successful formula that paved the way for what lay ahead. Several years would pass, with Shinkai working on titles such as Children Who Chase Lost Voices and another short film in someone's gaze. Shinkai was establishing a name for himself in the animation industry, and his reputation was only growing stronger. Garden of Words continued his pattern of a love story that was never meant to be. With incredible visuals and emotional storytelling become a fixture in his films, it would be Shinkai's next steps that would be his most remarkable yet. If he had not already established himself as a successor to Miyazaki's works, his next set of stories would do just that. In the summer of 2016, the world was gifted Kimi no Na wa. In English, Your Name could easily be considered Shinkai's magnum opus thus far in his career. As he has with his previous titles, the story of romance and tragedy is intertwined perfectly with this theatrical release. only perfected in such a way that the movie itself became his most successful yet. Your Name's commercial success expanded overseas, seeing itself played in American theaters in the spring of 2017. With the box office totaling $358 million, Your Name peaked as the second most successful anime movie of all time, the release only being bumped down recently to third after the release of Demon Slayer. Shinkai blew audiences away with Your Name. Visuals, animations, characters, and music that made sure to stick with you. Every glimmer of light had a purpose. Every subtle movement of Taki or Mitsuha's eyes. A soundtrack written courtesy of RADWIMPS cemented this movie as an instant classic. From the way it develops from a classic romantic comedy into one with paranormal themes, and its ultimate shift into a tragedy, Your Name took what Shinkai had already excelled at and perfected it. As expected, Your Name earned Shinkai a slew of awards and praise. The movie racked up over 20 awards and nominations, with much praise for the film's creativity, beauty, and story. Even with Shinkai and Your Name earning worldwide recognition, it would not be short-lived. 2019 saw Shinkai's most recent work of art, Weathering with You, brought to light. It showed that Your Name would not be a standalone masterpiece. Another commercial and critical success, Weathering with You climbed to 7th on the highest grossing anime movie list. It edged out the original Pokemon movie by over $20 million worldwide. With Your Name's formula working so perfectly in Weathering with You, Shinkai would also ask RADWIMPS to return for another soundtrack, in which they released more memorable music to accompany the film. While Weathering with You didn't reach the same amount of worldwide renown that Your Name did, it proved that Makoto Shinkai was not going to flame out anytime soon. To create such stories time after time, seemingly improving on the foundations of what made each preceding title work so well, it's safe to say that Makoto Shinkai will drop the title as the next Miyazaki. While inspired by the works of Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli, Makoto Shinkai has already begun forming a name for himself. Your Name, Weathering with You, and 5 centimeters per second have already solidified themselves as anime's finest in the 21st century. Shinkai is just 43 years old, roughly how old Miyazaki was when Ghibli was releasing My Neighbor Totoro and Kiki's Delivery Service. It's likely he has yet to reach his peak, meaning that the best is still to come.